Thank you, Per Espen. I'm here because of a lot of Nordic people, which I want to acknowledge. And Per Espen is one, and Karen O'Brien is here from University of Oslo, who's one of our advisors, with Linda Signa, who's not one of our advisors, but a close friend, and also the Crown Prince Hawken, who is not here yet, but also was instrumental in what you're going to see today, and I'll explain that. Drawdown is a term to describe that point in time when greenhouse gases peak and go down on a year-to-year basis. So that's what Drawdown is. That's the name of my organization, Project Drawdown. And we contend that that's the only sensible goal for humanity at this time. And that anything less than that is sort of like going over a cliff in slow motion. And what we want to do is reverse it, and I'll make the case for that. This is where we went, and when I say we, I mean the Crown Prince Hawken, Crown Prince Frederick, and Crown Princess Victoria on a royal fact-finding mission to the Greenland North Eemian Ice Research Station in 2009 on May 27th. First through a Danish naval boat to Kongelusik, and then on a C-105 from the United States. This is Prince Hawken. As you can see, Princess Victoria and Prince Frederick on the right and left. And we visited people, we talked to them. We also had seminars by scientists along the way. And then we went up there this way, which is so charming. You have a 5-gallon plastic bucket to pee in for the 3-hour flight. Nobody peed in it, to be sure. And this doesn't have sound, unfortunately. It's supposed to. You can hear from my thing. But this is what it's like, the weather there. The weather is, this is almost summertime. And it is extraordinarily cold. And what came out of this was really a tremendous admiration, I believe, for the scientists who are doing the work around the world on climate change. The threats to each person there is daily. And when you go in this ice cave where the drilling is done, and it's basically drilling down 270 meters to the rock to go back to this period. And this is the slide that's really salient here. And this is where we are, the current levels of CO2 and other greenhouse gas equivalents in the atmosphere. And as you can see, human beings, except in the threshold period, just in the 40s, have never existed on this planet when CO2 levels were exceeding 300 ppm. So we have no idea what's going to happen where we are. And those who do the science, they may be right, they may not. We don't know. It's good science, but the fact of the matter is that we are in terra nova. We are in unknown territory with respect to climate and the implications of it. That circle you see right there is the Eemian period. It's what we studied and looked at in the North Eemian Ice Research Station. That was 125 years ago, 125,000 years ago, excuse me. There were lion and giraffes in Germany. There was crocodiles and hippopotamus in the Thames River Delta in London. There was alligators in Alaska, and the water in the oceans was 20 to 30 feet higher, depending where on Earth. And that was at 285 ppm. Okay. So we're at 402. So it was this really, and this one, which is Article 2 of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it talks about the ultimate objective of this convention is to achieve stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations within a sufficient time to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally to climate change, to ensure that food production is not threatened, etc. And as much as I admire the UN and very much admire the IPCC, I can't think of a worse goal, frankly. The idea of mitigation, stabilization, reduction, zero, etc., is not a useful goal for humanity. We have to go back the way we came. And that's why Drawdown is named, and that's why we emphasize it. The question is, can we achieve it? This is the Carbon Mitigation Initiative that came out in Princeton, 2001, when the third assessment came out. And this is the solutions that comprise the famous global wedges, the 8 wedges that, if implemented, would basically achieve stabilization by 2050. And I looked at this and I thought, whoa, this is a problem, because these are the ones that only be implemented by large multinational conservative corporations, the ones in gray. In other words, what could you do with this list? You could put a solar panel on your roof and you could drive less, and that's about it. What was missing here was agency. Cities, towns, villages, farmers, forest lands, grasslands, communities, neighborhoods, small companies, medium-sized companies. That was not on this list. They weren't there. And as I said, every one of these was deeply underwater financially. That is to say, if the boards of directors of these conservative corporations undertook them, they would then be sued for fiduciary irresponsibility, liability, because they would lose so much money. They'd be losing their balance sheet. They'd be spending their balance sheet. Boards of directors do not spend their balance sheet unless it's an investment in the future, and that was not going to happen. So, what did we do? I decided in 2012, when Bill McKibben came out with his article called Global Warming's Terrifying New Math, and what happened is it was aptly named. It really terrified people, and people came to me and said, basically, it's game over. I mean, activists who had been in this field for 10 years or 20 years said, it's game over. And I'm going to go move to the Squamish Valley in British Columbia and take my kids and hope everything's going to be okay in my lifetime. But they were giving up. And I just thought, well, maybe when people think it's game over, it's game on. In other words, it's actually the opposite of what it appears to be. Maybe that level of intensity and understanding is a provocation. And so we created Drawdown. What I knew is that Drawdown, what it does is, it set out to do and has done, is map, measure, and model the 100 most substantive solutions to global warming. Okay? And I don't say climate change, I say global warming. Why? Because it has never been done. Not the top 10, 20, 50, 70, put any number you want in there. And after 40 years of understanding the greatest crisis human civilization has ever faced, we have never mapped, measured, and modeled the top solutions to global warming. Go Google it if you think I'm wrong. We did. The Union of Concerned Scientists, the number 3 solution is put a power strip in your home entertainment center. Seriously. Scientific American, move closer to work. These aren't solutions. These are proverbs. Proverbs are like, love your mother, for sure. It's not a solution, it's a proverb. It's something that's true, it's an act, but they aren't solutions. So I knew that if we did it, we had to do it in a way that would be credible. And to be credible, it had to be done by a collaboration of people. Many, many scientists and researchers and scholars, not a small group of people. And so we had no money, which in a sense was an advantage. And what we did is we went out to the world, and we went to universities like this, all over the world, and asked who would like to be a Drawdown fellow, a research scholar, for the princely sum of $1,000. They would take a solution, do the tech review, the lit review, basically write a thesis for $1,000. And we were inundated with applications from all over the world. We ended up with people from 22 countries, from 6 continents, 40% women, half PhDs, all with advanced degrees, extraordinary people, Rhodes Scholars, White House Fellows, Aga Khan Award winners. They had CVs better at the age 26 than we all had on staff. Extraordinary. And that is the core research of researchers of Drawdown. We also had 128 advisors, Karen O'Brien, Per Espen, and others from around the world, who advised us on content and anything else they wanted to advise us on, for that matter. And we also had about 60 outside expert scientific reviewers who reviewed each model to find out flaws and mistakes within that. What we did, and which you'll see, is we did the math. Basically, we did the math. We tried to do it as objectively as possible, without bias. Our job wasn't to advocate, it was to illuminate, to reflect back to the world what it is doing and what it knows. Every solution we modeled, the first 80, is in place, it's happening, it's being implemented, it's hands-on, it's practical, it's scaling. We understand it very well. We understand the carbon impact, and we understand the economics. So those are the 80 we modeled. Then we also we also talk about 20 coming attractions. The things that Carlotta was talking about, these extraordinary technological breakthroughs that are occurring around the world that apply to global warming. So this is in the book. It's just basically a snapshot of part of the dashboard of a model. So just to give people a sense of the granulation with which we did each solution. And we also took into consideration, obviously, double counting and system dynamics. So it is a complicated model. It took us 2.5 years to refine it. It is now being published in peer-reviewed journals. And what we came up with data like this. And this isn't the book itself. This is just geothermal. And it shows you a ranking, the first one, ranking in terms of carbon. The only carbon numbers we used were from peer-reviewed literature. We didn't use anecdotes. We didn't use beliefs. We didn't use assertions. We used peer-reviewed literature only. That also made the data more conservative, frankly, as some of these techniques are accelerating and getting much better with respect to land use, but we couldn't use that data. And our reference case was basically IPCC, what are we modeling against? What are we comparing against? IEA, IPCC, YASA, Ampere 450. Some of you will recognize these acronyms. But basically, the best institutions in the world that we trust to do this research. So we did it by country and by hectare. Every hectare of land in the world by FAO, we identified its present use or disuse or misuse. And the same with country in terms of energy use, right through 2050, and that came right from the IEA. The second number is the number of the amount of carbon or greenhouse gas equivalents in carbon that would be either avoided or sequestered by 2050 if the scaling continued as shown in the model. That's an assumptive input. Some things may not scale. Who knows what's going to happen? But we used existing scaling, and some had S-curves, some flattened out like LEDs, so all are different. But we used pre-existing data to determine what the scaling would be. The next number is net cost. Net cost, why net? Net is, what if we didn't do this? What would we have to do instead? Would it be coal or combined cycle gas, or who knows? But it would be something else other than that. Would it cost more or less to do geothermal in where it's applied in the model? In this case, it costs less. And ditto with net savings, which is if we use coal or other things, will we cost more or will we cost less? So the savings over 30 years is $1.0 trillion. So what I'm going to show you is just some of the solutions. And this is improved rice cultivation, which is a high emitter of methane because it's anaerobic when the paddies are flooded. And there's two techniques to avoid that, and we discuss those, which can reduce methane production in rice by 50%. And here is wind. This is offshore wind. This is not photoshopped. This is a triathlete at Sheringham Shoal in Norfolk, and these are Siemens 3 megawatt wind turbines there. And you can see go back, the savings are relatively small. I do think that wind turbines, offshore wind turbines, are going to grow much faster than we projected. That's my opinion, but we had to go against existing data. This is nuclear. We got criticized for modeling nuclear. As I said, we have our own feelings about each of these. This is what we call a regret solution because the regrets have already happened. I happen to choose a photograph here of one being dismantled. This is the Hanford reactor in Washington State, so it's coming apart. But right now, nuclear is 11% of our energy supply, and we do different models, but it goes to 13% and so forth. It depends where in the world. China, it goes up dramatically, not in Europe, not in the United States. This is Rooftop Solar, and again, in the book and in our website, we tried to choose imagery that broke the stereotype of these solutions. And the stereotype of these solutions is suburbia with a drone going over it, looking down, a 2-car garage, a 3-car garage, and a lawn, and big wide streets, and suburban, and these panels on these 6, 8, 10 kilowatt installations on these roofs, which is just a different form of materialism, in my opinion. And this is a Urdu woman at Lake Titicaca, 12,000 feet on a straw island that she has to replace every 3 months, the straw, or it sinks. And she's been using kerosene for decades. And now she doesn't use kerosene. So again, to what Carlotta was talking about, the cascading benefits of these technologies are sometimes overlooked by just focusing on carbon. And her smile is not because there's a camera, it's because it's transformed her life and the safety of her family and her daughters. And as you can see, the net savings there is extraordinary, 3.46 trillion. This is the Kermode bear in the Great Bear Forest. This is forest protection. I'm going to go through these a little more quickly. This is regenerative agriculture. We define it. There's many definitions. We stipulatively define it in the book. You can disagree or agree or add to it. Very important solution. This one is a Dasanak woman in Ethiopia. They built a bridge across from her village and a bar for the workers. And the women went across the bridge once they could walk on it and to the bar and picked up used SIM cards and beer bottle caps and started making beautiful jewelry and headdresses. And now we call it household recycling. Again, not a blue bin on the sidewalk, but really, imagination. And now they sell them to boutiques in France, by the way. This is a cool dude in Germany. He makes electric bikes. He's testing them out. This is what I want to look like pretty soon when I'm older now, so he looks so cool. And this one is PricewaterhouseCoopers, the former accounting firm of the Oscars. You remember them? Some of you get the joke. This is the Montreal office. The person on the little mini Segway scooter on the iPad is from Prague. And what he can do is log on without anybody's permission to Montreal, get on a scooter, I guess he's already on one, and scoot around the office and go to your office and say, hi, I'm here. And what, am I late for the meeting? And you weren't invited. Well, I'm here anyway. And he could be up there right now. He could ask questions and be tweeting and so forth like that. In other words, what this is a transport solution, and we are sending protoplasm all around the world when we really want ideas, right? And we're sending a lot of human cells, and this is a solution. This is managed grazing, called many names, AMP, Rotational Holistic Resource Management. It's a solution that's been over-touted, in my opinion. And one of the things that happened is in order to measure, to really model land use implications, which sequester carbon, they don't avoid emissions entirely. Most do in some ways, but they do both. But in order to do that, we actually had to have science that measured exactly the impact. Well, in the IPCC and other things, you see forests and farms, like as if that described land use, and it does not describe land use. And even agroforestry does not describe land use. So in the process of modeling this, we kept splitting. From a biological point of view, we became splitters. Like, not agroforestry, but multi-strata agroforestry. tree intercropping, silvopasture. So we ended up with 22 different distinct land use solutions that we modeled, and this, of course, is one of them. And then we also did what we call coming attractions. And marine permaculture was invented by Dr. Brian Van Herzen, PhD plasma physicist from Princeton. And he has a Cessna 337, which he flies to Europe every year. In 2001, a friend who's a glaciologist said, "Would you fly over Greenland and count the melt ponds?" So he did. And then 2 years later, he was asked again to do it, and he said, well, they're not melt ponds anymore, they're melt lakes. Okay, and then he flew again, and the year following, and he said, it's a melt lake, no plural. And he became so upset at the rate of change of warming in the Arctic region that he changed his whole life to restoring living systems. And this technology is making big frames that go underwater, made of recycled PET. PET does not break down in salt water. Why? I don't know, but it does not. And pumps that are go down to the thermocline, the cold waters, 200, 300, 400 feet down, and they're actuated just by the rise and fall of the water, and they bring up those nutrient-laden water, and you get the beginning of a trophic cascade. You get phytoplankton, zooplankton, you get algae, you get kelp, you get feeder fish, forage fish, etc. And you begin to deacidify the ocean. Nothing sequesters carbon faster than kelp. Not bamboo, not trees, not forests, kelp. So it is an extraordinary technology, and I'll refer to it again. This is hydrogen boron fusion. You do the same thing in Europe that we do in the United States, is you dig big holes in the ground, and you put billions and billions of euros in it, or dollars. You get bulldozers, and you cover it up and say it's 30 years out. You have ITER now, okay, at Marseille. We have them in the United States. Fusion has always been a technology that's 30 years out. It's making starlight on Earth. It's a difficult job, no question about it. This company, Tri-Alpha Energy, started by Glenn Seaborg, the Nobel Prize winner, spent 17 years in stealth. They didn't say anything to anybody because they know what other people would say. And we're quiet. They raised $500 million in so doing, by the way, none from the government. And when they started out, they didn't start out to make a point. They went to utility companies and said, what do you need? What would you want? They said, well, safe and modular and affordable. Makes sense. Conventional fusion is not safe. It's neutronic. This is aneutronic, boron. And away they went. And they brought me in 11 years ago as a journalist. I was deeply skeptical. You may be right now. It's fine. I would if I was you. And I began to watch them for 11 years. They never missed a milestone. Do you know how ridiculous that is in the tech world? They never missed it once. And they have one milestone to go. And they've achieved the most difficult milestone of all, which is to sustain plasma. They've sustained it. That's the most difficult thing of all. No one's done it. And there was a cover story on them in Time magazine when they came out 15, 16, 17 months ago. Right? So you can read about it. So it may not occur. If the reactor goes down, and you can walk in them. When they fire, you just walk back in with safety, breathe and so forth. Totally safe. If the reactor goes down, you can start it with a Honda generator. Restart it. I mean, it's an extraordinary technology. I think they're going to succeed. This is repopulating the Mammoth Steppe. The Mammoth Steppe used to include Norway. It doesn't anymore. It used to include Alaska, Canada as well. Now it's the subarctic area of Siberia. And the Mammoth Steppe was the largest range of grazing animals in the world at one time. And then weather changed for sure, and human beings swept across the mammoth steppe and killed just everything there was. It was cold, they were hungry, they killed it, they went across the land bridge to Alaska, went right down North America and killed another 44 different charismatic mammals, all right? Okay, so what two scientists and biologists are doing in the mammoth steppe in Siberia is they want to restore it to grasslands. They want to restore the animals that were there. You know, muskox, they can't do the woolly mammoth. Well, people are trying, but they can't do it. Reindeer, they can, they have. The Yakutian horse, many other animals, and they had predators as well at that time. What do animals do? They move around and they graze. They don't stay in one place, but what do they do in the winter? It's dark, can't see. They brush the snow away with their hoof, with their snout, with their horn to get the dead grass. And that lowers the temperature of the soil by 2 degrees centigrade. So this is a permafrost solution. It has many other benefits, but it's about preserving, or hopefully preserving it long enough so that global warming can be reversed, and that isn't a problem that we face, but it is certainly right now. This is building with wood. The Europeans are way ahead of us in the United States on this one. We're building now a 12-story one in Portland. Wood buildings avoid a tremendous amount of carbon. Steel and concrete are huge contributors to global emissions in terms of carbon. These are more fireproof than steel and concrete buildings. Read the write-up in the book, please. It sounds counterintuitive. They're safer. They really are. And they're so light and they're so beautiful. And as I said, you're about 10, 15 years ahead of us in Europe than in the United States because of our laws. This is one more I just want to talk. A cow walks onto a beach. I named this. You know the panda bear joke, right? A panda bear walks into the bar. I'll tell you later if you don't know. This was a farmer in Prince Edward Island in Canada, and he has a dairy farm, and I think every farm in Prince Edward Island is on a beach. It's such a tiny island. He noticed that the cows who ate seaweed produced more milk. So why? He asked his county agent. Why? He said, I don't know. And he referred him to a scientist, Rob Kinley, and Rob Kinley said it must have something to do with methane. They're not producing as much methane because it's so inefficient, methane production. So they tried it out. So they took certain of the cows and they fed them more seaweed, more kelp that was washing up on the beach, and they put these big plastic bags on their head and, several times a day and measured the exhalation of methane. And sure enough, there's a straight-up correlation. More seaweed, less methane. So far, so good, except it's a science experiment. What are you going to do with that? You can't. It's expensive, it's bulky, there isn't enough seaweed, and most cows don't live on a beach. And, but he discovered a scientist in Queensland, in Australia, who was doing the same work, and they worked together, and they identified an algae called Asparagopsis taxiformis. If fed to ruminants, cows, sheep, goats, in a 2% amount, reduces methane production by 70 to 90%. This is a huge solution. So what's so interesting about it is this guy is now talking to this guy. Even just as the book came out, they started talking as they heard about each other, and they're going to use marine permaculture to produce Asparagopsis taxiformis. So this goes to what Carlotta spoke about again, which is really getting these technologies together. What's going on is extraordinary. It is not being guided by government policy, certainly in our country. That's for sure. Well, it's being guided, all right, but right down the toilet. But it's, but we really do need governments that are enlightened and to really be able to see at the cutting edges and to foment it in any way, encourage it any way they can. through policy, subsidies, taxation, or whatever. What surprised us? Everything. The whole darn list surprised us. We didn't see it coming. We didn't see refrigerant management. We wished it wasn't number one. It wasn't very sexy. It's not what we wanted. But that's due to the Kigali Agreement and to the Montreal Protocol. It was passed last year in Rwanda. But this surprised us. The number 3 solution, reduce food waste. Again, we just did not see it coming. Really, when we thought about it and looked at it, it made total sense. But in terms of its position, that the number 4 solution, plant-rich diet. It's not vegan, it's not vegetarian. It means 2 things. Reducing the protein intake in northern countries to about 50 grams instead of 100 or 90, which is the average, and increasing it in countries where they do not get enough protein, and also increasing the caloric intake to 2,500 in those countries. But together, it produced the number 4 solution. And what surprised us is that food is 8 of the top 20 solutions. And that includes land use as well, not just food, but how we produce our food. And this surprised us, that food is a greater contributor than energy. Like, if you had asked me to make a list, when we started this, the top 5, top 10 solutions, I would have got them all wrong. And what is so fascinating is that when we got them done, only 13 weeks ago, and a friend called me and said, how's it going? I said, we have the numbers. We're kind of shocked at the numbers in a good way, not a bad way, but we're surprised, we're stunned. We didn't see it coming. It's just the nature of our model. We saw the numbers, but we didn't believe them until the end. And I said, I don't think anybody in the world knows the top 5 solutions to global warming. He said, no. I said, no, really? So we didn't, that's for sure. But I said, I don't think anybody in the world knows. And she said, what are they? And I said, you tell me. And this is a person who's a professor, written, published, climate for 30 years, fantastic scientist, okay? She said, okay, let me think. And she said, it'll be mass transit, it'll be EVs, no, it'll be solar, da-da-da-da. She was, going through her Rolodex of solutions in her mind, and then came up with 5 of them. And said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not in order, just 5 of them. And she said, how did I do? And I said, that wasn't the point of the question. I said, well, what was the point? I said, look how long it took you to come up with 5 any solutions. And you're probably one of 1,000 people in the world who has the most expertise in this area. What does the rest of the world know? I was at a talk in Seattle a week ago, and there was 2 boys about Paris's son's age. One was 14, one was 16. And I turned to them and I said, how old are you? They said 14, 16. I said, can you name the top 5 NBA teams in the country? He said, yeah, easy. I said, yeah, right. We can't name the 5 top solutions. And you can argue them, by the way, it's fine. But we can't name them. After 40 years, what have we been doing? We've been naming the problem really, really well. Here's another thing that surprised us, land use, okay? 4 of the top 20. I'll go these quickly. Energy, 5 of the top 20. Now, if you combine onshore wind and offshore wind, as in the bottom is 22, that's the number 1 solution. Okay, not refrigerant management. However, and that's top 1 by materials, but here's the one that's fascinating. This one. This is girls' education, educating girls. And this is the number 6 solution. It shows 59.6 gigatons avoided. Okay, what is that? It's the difference between the UN median and high population figure in 2050, 10.8 or 9.7 billion. UN is very clear as to what would make that difference, which is family planning. There's two ways to get to family planning. One is to not yank a girl out of school at puberty or pre-puberty and have her married off by her culture, religion, her father, or by fear. And she becomes a woman on somebody else's terms, not her own. If she's allowed to stay in school past 10th, 11th grade, she gets an education and she becomes a woman on more of her terms, if not entirely. And the reproduction rate between the two is the average of 5 plus and 2. That data has been in for decades, by the way. This is not new data. We know this. So that woman chooses to plan her family. Well, if you now take the other one, just family planning, clinics where women can choose to be supported in their reproductive health and rights and planning, you put them two together, and you get 119.2 gigatons, which is the number one solution to global warming, is the empowering of girls and women. That's number one. It's not a panel. Nothing wrong with solar panels, but I'm just saying, what you hear all the time is solar, solar, solar. You know, I'm just saying, this is the Princeton mitigation wedges. This is ours. This is what the solutions look like, right? And the small ones are just as important as the big ones. The bigger may be an impact, but we need them all. And the idea is that somehow we just should focus on the big ones. It's like saying, I just want my kidney and my large intestine and my stomach. I don't need my thyroid. No, you need it all. And we need, this is a system. We need all the solutions. There's no such thing as a small one. Inconsequential. And so we have to get away. It's a very American thing, the top 10, top 10, top 10, right? No, it's all of them together. And the ones that we don't mention and measure here either. And is Drawdown possible? All I can say is we do it every year, and this is what it looks like. This is the NASA simulation. You see the increase of carbon, which is shown in color by the yellow, the orange, the red, the vermilion, the darker red, the concentrations of CO2. And what you see, of course, is it building up during the winter and going into the spring. And then what happens in the spring is what's happening right now in Oslo, and blossoms and trees are leaving out. It happened last week, right? Boom. What happens is bringing in carbon, right? Sequestering carbon. And you begin to see blue. You begin to see oxygen. You begin to see the opposite. And the fact of the matter is that every year we draw down 6 to 7 ppm. Drawdown happens every year. This is not like, somebody said, that's a very ambitious goal, drawdown. I said, no, it's not. The planet does it every year. You know, and this is what it looks like. And this is what the mechanism is, which is stomata. Right? And I don't have time to go into this. I just, and this one I want to talk about, this is the cover, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, a very cheeky, brash title, if ever there was one. It really is. I didn't write it, actually, an intern at the publisher did. And two things. One is, it is the most comprehensive plan ever proposed because no one's ever proposed one, all right? So there's nothing to compare it to, all right? And the reason we call it plan, we just say, whoa, whoa, whose plan? It's not our plan. Not ours at all. What we're saying is we map, measure, and model what the world is doing. And by implication, we're saying the world does have a plan. It does. It is working. It is scaling. We don't get that. We don't hear that. What we get is, you know, this, well, never mind what we get, okay? And I've got no more seconds, but I want to say one more thing. And I know I'm going over, because I just lost my timer there, which is just about language. Can we clean up our language, please? Stop using the negative. Stop decarbonization. We decarbonize. It's up there. That's the problem, not the solution. Please. Negative emissions, another climate lingo. Negative emissions. What's a negative emission? It's like a negative tree. What's a negative tree? You know, what's a negative? It's nothing. And that's what the language is being used. And we're also using military metaphors. Fight, combat, stop, slash. Can we stop all that? And we're using it against climate change. We're saying, fight climate change. Do not fight climate change. You will lose. Climate always will change. You don't fight change. So the terminology is all messed up. And that terminology is as if there's an enemy out there. There's no enemy out there. The atmosphere is not our enemy. It's our ally. Always is, always will be. So we have to change. That's why we say reverse global warming. That we can do by what we do here on Earth. But let's change the language. And that's what we try to do in the book, is make it not just aspirational, but to show with science, grounded science, that drawdown is possible. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much.